In this video, I'm going to be discussing the way our government is structured without UBI versus how it would be structured with UBI. The way I'm going to be breaking this up is first the two-tier system that our current government works off of, which is going to look like this, with the government at the bottom and then the economy is basically at the top. And then you have the lower middle, and then you have the upper class who ends up with all the money. I'll explain this all throughout the video. And then with UBI, you would have a three-tier system with the government at the bottom, UBI in the middle, and then the economy at the top, where money continuously circulates, and the rich still continuously get richer, just not as fast. All right, let's discuss this. I'll try to keep it simple so that if you want to know how UBI would realistically work, hopefully me writing it on paper as I go along and explaining in very simple terms, maybe this will help you understand how UBI would work in a real system, such as the United States and the economy. Thank you for joining me. All right, let's begin. Okay, so the question I have today is, what is our current economic structure? Well, let's start off with the economy. Economy here. And then at the bottom, government. Attached to the government, you have the Federal Reserve. And attached to the economy, I'm actually going to attach the states. Because in order for the states to actually have money, they need to be participating in the economy. So now then you have three classes. You have, of course, there are in-between classes, but in general, you have lower class, which if you're lower class, this is typically meaning you're living paycheck to paycheck or lower than that, and you don't have any room for any type of saving. You don't typically live in a lower class community where the roads are probably not outdated. You go to definitely public schooling. So this is the lower class. Then you have the middle class. The middle class is typically looked at as the balance of the entire structure of the nation. If the middle class is doing good, then you know that the nation is doing good. This is typically how it's looked at. And middle class, of course, they have a little more room for lenience. They typically, buy nicer things. They live in nicer communities that are more updated. They might opt for private schools in some instances, but usually they still tend to most public schooling. And then at the top, of course, you have the upper class. Let's compare the lower class to the middle class. The lower class folks typically are the working class. They do not own businesses. They actually work for middle class to upper class business owners. They might even make money by, cleaning. They might do daycare. They might be watching the kids of the middle class and upper class people. This is typically how the lower class will earn their money from the two other classes. Now, the middle class, a lot of them do tend to be working class, as some of them do tend to go through higher paying jobs and they become middle class that way. However, a lot of them do tend to own businesses, small businesses and things of that nature. A lot of the middle class folks are not too big into real estate, but they do tend to own and they do not rent, whereas lower class will tend to rent. Now, where the upper class is interesting is they handle all of the technological upgrades. They handle all of the major changes in the major sections of technology and the economy. So if any of the lower two classes actually want to compete with the upper class, in order for them to do so, they're actually going to be met with a lot of pushback from the upper class, because the upper class has the most power. They are able to maintain it. Anyway, this is how it's separated. Lower, middle, upper class. Now, as far as the money goes, let's start off with $10. So a question, how does the money enter the economy in the first place? Money doesn't just appear out of thin air. It has to come from somewhere. So this is where the Federal Reserve comes in. The Federal Reserve will basically print out money, hand it to the government. The government will then basically throw it into the economy, which is basically giving it to the upper class folks. And it will be then distributed between the lower and middle class, and then the states get some of it. So the return is basically two-sided. You have the economy receiving $10. Well, I'm not going to put it there yet. And then out of that $10, the lower class folks will get back $1 for their work. The middle class will get $2 back for their work. The states will end up altogether getting $3. And then we have $6, which means the upper class gets the remaining $4. Okay, so then what else happens? So at a certain point, the government will end up taxing the lower, middle, and upper class. But you know what? The upper class folks happen to be really, really good at avoiding taxes. So they end up paying no taxes usually in these cases. The middle class, they have to give away one of their dollars to the government. The lower class folks either do not pay taxes because they don't make enough money, or they give about $0.50. That's $0.50. So they give away maybe $0.50. So they're left with $0.50. The other half of the dollar goes straight into the economy. And the other dollar here, half of the dollar goes back into the economy. The other half of the dollar goes into savings. So these are savings. And the lower class, no savings. And as you noticed, half a dollar of the lower class money goes to the government, half a dollar goes to the economy. So what does the government do with this money? So what ends up happening is the government redistributes this money, and of course, yes, they get a tiny bit of back they get a half a dollar back. And where does this money end up going? Typically, this money actually ends up going back to the lower class folks that can't afford anything. In reality, let's be honest, it's not even a dollar. It's more like an eighth of a dollar. Goes back to the lower class folks. The rest of it goes back to the actual government funding. And then what ends up happening at this point, after all is said and done, you still have the upper class with $3.50. They never contribute back to the government enough. This leaves the burden of taxes all on the lower middle class. Eventually, what ends up happening, the lower class can't afford anything anymore because prices keep going up and they're just not getting enough money pushed back into them from the economy or from any other classes. The middle class starts to become more lower class, and they have to eventually take away their savings, and eventually their $2 really feels like $1, and now they're in the lower class situation. And because of this, the upper class continuously takes their share of the money because they practically own the economy, and this creates more money, and they end up with $6. While the middle class ends up with $1, the lower class ends up with probably like negative $5 at this point. And you know what happens at this point? The Federal Reserve has no money, but they have to print out more money. So they print out all of the money. And they say, here, go back into the economy, money. And the upper class are like, oh, well, thank you. I'll take more money. I have $6 times 6. I have $12, which means the middle class now have $1.50. And this whole economy just breaks eventually. Eventually, this is what happens. You got the upper class who's laughing at you. And this is the corrupt system we currently live in. This is what our structure of economy looks like without UBI. The money continuously moves up to the top. It never goes any other direction. It continuously moves up and up and up. The Fed has to print more money in order for the economy to keep running, and this lowers the overall value of the economy. So, in other words, our economy looks like a complete mess. This is our economy after 100, 200 years, maybe 300 years. Either way, it ends with the billionaires laughing at us. The people that are hoarding all the money because they have all of the control of the economy and they're using it for their gains. Okay. Now that we have that mess out of the way, let's answer the question of what would our economy look like with UBI? That's the question of the day. Well, that two-tier system that turned into a complete mess, this is what it would look like. Let's have the economy right here. Below the economy, you would actually have UBI, and this would be implemented through a value-added tax. And the value-added tax is the key. And then at the bottom, like always, you would still have the government, and then attached to it is the Federal Reserve. So you still have this structure, and then, of course, around the economy, you have the lower, middle, and upper classes. And of course, next to it, you have the state. Let's talk about how the structure works out here. So of course, let's start off with the $10. So it's 10x dollars down here. So you're going to start off with the Federal Reserve. You have $10. They transfer this money into the economy. And then of course, this is distributed. They take their $1 through work. Middle class takes their $2 through work. Look, the economy's moving. People are purchasing. The states still take their $3. And the upper class still gets their $4. So great. Now, the value-added tax hits. What happens? The middle class has to take about half of their dollar away and put it into the value-added tax. Oh, the upper class has to take about $2 away and put it into the value-added tax. And of course, the states still maintain their money. So what does this do? This actually means that come taxing time, okay, the middle class still puts their about half a dollar into the government. The lower class still puts their half a dollar into the government. But if you notice something, the lower class didn't have to put any money into the value-added tax. And the interesting thing about the value-added tax is that proportionately, each one is going to get about 2/3 of a dollar. 2/3, 2/3, and 2/3. And this covers the amount of money that the value-added tax goes into. So what happens here? So you have 2/3 of a dollar. The lower class gave a small portion back, but now they actually have some money left over, if you notice. They have about a half a dollar left over. It's not much, but they have about half a dollar left over after all is said and done. And this is because the UBI is transferred over to the lower class, the UBI is transferred over to the middle class, and it's transferred over to the upper class. And the best part about it is this money it's distributed evenly. And as you might notice, it continuously takes from the upper class. The upper class continuously pays their $2 into the VAT every single time, thus recirculating the money into the classes that are not getting it through the economy, and they're not getting it through the government. They're not getting it through all these other sources. What they're getting it through is the universal basic income, which will constantly, it's like a cog. When you look at it, look at the setup we have here. I know my handwriting is terrible, but we have the economy at the top, the UBI twisting everything and keeping it churning, and then the government at the bottom keeping the country intact, basically. This is how our structure should be. This is the way we keep the wheels churning without continuously relying on the Fed to put money into the economy when it's not necessary to do so. The way we put money back into the economy is to put it back into our hands and recirculate it the way money is intended to be. See, the thing is, money is intended to be circulated. It's not intended to be continuously printed over and over and over again. The only time money should be printed is when the population increases enough to demand the increase. Yes, in this instance, you might notice that the upper class doesn't get to save as much money. In fact, I would argue it's probably about 40 to 60% lower savings, but it keeps going. Long term, this is the best outcome. What I'm trying to do is show how this would look in simplistic terms, how it makes sense. Like, even if I'm not an economy major, if you look at the differences between a two-tier system where you only have the economy and the government to control the economy versus having a universal basic income with a value-added tax controlling the flow of income and keeping it circulating throughout everyone. Makes sense to me. Anyway, thanks for subscribing. Thanks for sharing these videos around. And thank you for liking my content. Every single time you like something, it shares it with other people, and it really spreads the word. Until next time, don't forget, humanity first. We need more people to get on board with UBI.